Hello. Today we are diving into magnetic storytelling. There's so many different types of content that you can be using to express your knowledge, your wisdom, your gifts, to share your story. There's the educational, the inspirational, the motivational, there's promotional and conversion and all different types. And we're going to get into that a little bit further into the course. But today we're going to focus on magnetic storytelling because for two reasons, really. One, and most importantly, is your story transforms and it moves energy. So you will notice throughout this course, when I answer your questions in the coaching calls and when I'm on social media, I am constantly using my story. So I teach the course, all the courses through my story. I talk about my story in my social media content, and I often answer your questions with my story. The reason for that is when we share our stories, there's an energetic transmission that takes place between all involved. And so it starts to move energy. So when I share my story in whatever format, it is moving energy and whoever is hearing it. And that's the same for you and your story. That's why our stories are so powerful and why it's so important to me when I think about sharing who you are in any capacity. Your story is the most powerful way to do that because you are healing people simply by sharing your experience. Something that I always say is that my brain is worth millions, but my wisdom is worth billions. And my story is my wisdom. It's my lived experience. And that is the same for everybody who is watching this video. Your story is your superpower. So there's that energetic piece where it moves energy in people, it activates the dormant DNA. We are activating each other's soul blueprints. And then there's the other layer to this is people connect through story. It is so much more impactful than just nailing three things you need to go do right now, or here's this information to you and I'm going to teach it in this way. Our stories help us transmit this information in a way where people can receive it and understand how it applies to them and then know what they can now go do, whether that's take an action, joining your offer, or whatever that might be. However, telling your story it's an art form, right? Storytelling in and of itself is an art form. And it's something we're going to talk about today in this session because we've all been on social media or wherever, and you're scrolling, and someone is telling their story, and it's like the story is really good, but they're really bad storytellers, and you just can't sit through it. And that sucks because it's like the story is so good if they just knew a couple of tweaks to make that impactful, right? And storytelling is also a practice. So you have to be really kind and patient to yourself as you're practicing telling your story. For me, in the beginning when I was telling my story, it was really bumpy and clunky. But I always say, like, the superpower that I had is I was willing to be witnessed in my process. And so I invite you to do the same. Allow people to witness you in your process of becoming a magnetic storyteller. So if the first few times you tell your story, it doesn't hit, it doesn't pop off, it's practice. You're gathering information and you're practicing. You can practice behind the scenes, right? You can just like record content and never post it. You can record it and post it. There's all different types of ways to practice, but the point is, you will not become a good storyteller until you allow yourself to just express and play. And that's why I actually even call this whole program the Ascension Lab, because it's a lab. We're playing, we're experimenting, we're trying new things. We are just in a playful mode where we're also collecting data, right? So, like, we never fail. We're just collecting data and information of how to do something differently. So today we're going to dive into the magnetic storytelling. And the first thing you want to do is you want to find your story. We all have a main story, the main thing that we've overcome, maybe these significant transformations in our lives that really ground and anchor in our vision, our mission, whatever it is that we are here to create. That is a really important story to be able to tell, and it will be the backbone of much of your content. But there's also a lot of micro stories. So you'll see in my content, there's times where I'm telling like my bigger picture of from rock bottom to where I am now, leaving the narcissism to where I am now. But then there's all these little micro stories that I tell about overcoming my fear of being seen or learning how to create content or all these little stories that pop up that help me to articulate what it is that I'm trying to teach, and it invokes a feeling. Your story is also the most impactful way to broadcast your frequency out into the field, into the ethers, so that it attracts your soul family, soul tribe, soul clients, whatever it is that you're calling in through your visibility. So the first thing we want to do is we want to go through and we want to find your story. So this worksheet is all about thinking about all of your experiences and turning these into stories. And in the beginning, there's a lot of imposter syndrome that will come up in your head, right? We're clearing visibility blocks. So expect that at different times, you're going to feel like that story is not good enough. That's not going to help people. Every single story is impactful, and those give you opportunities just to clear the blocks. So when you're going through and you're trying to find your story, there's 4 T's that you want to look for in anything that you're thinking about talking about. There's the truth, right? So what was happening in your life or your business? What did you believe at that time? So for me, this would be often when I talk about my rock bottom. This is the truth of where I was at a difficult point in my life. Then there's the tension, the challenge, the conflict, the turning point, right? So this is when I first posted the social media content. The transformation, this is the breakthrough, the realization, the shift, the journey that I went on after I posted this content, what it opened up for me, how it transformed my life, right? What changed within me as I was overcoming this fear of being seen. And then there's the transmission. This is the message, the activation, the frequency that you want to transmit to others when they hear your story. So these are the 4 T's you want to look for. And if you have these 4 parts, you have a story. And again, it could be from the grocery store today. It doesn't have to be the big, huge story, right? You're gonna have your main story, but then you're gonna have a lot of little ones that happen. And a lot of us are teaching from the place of things that happen in our lives right now. And so it's not always this like, 2 years ago I was doing XYZ, or this was like the main turning point. Sometimes it's like last week I had this block and I overcame it, and here's what that looked like. So again, if you hit the 4 T's, you've got a story. And now we're always going back to archetypes because I think it makes it really easy for us to understand exactly what we're doing, but there's different types of story. So sometimes you're telling a story just to connect with people. This is building intimacy. This is humanizing yourself and your brand so that you're bringing people into your world, right? They want to see themselves in your story. So this is solely just based for connection, just calling in your people, bringing in that resonance. This is often when I'll see people who come in who share the same story I do. They feel connected to me because we have a very similar experience. There's the authority story. This is where you're building your credibility, right? We talked about your different credibility and authority markers in an earlier module. This is where we're talking about it from the story perspective, where your entire story is going to build the credibility about who you are. The origin story. This is the why. Why are you here? Why are you doing what you did? This is also the big arcing story, right? Or character arc. I don't think that was the right word, but you get what I'm saying. Then there's the vulnerability, right? This is when maybe we're talking about shame that we've alchemized. This is the things that we reveal about ourselves that were once difficult to reveal. And these are the things that also build connection, but it also helps people see truth in you, right? Truth is a frequency. And when we really allow our walls to come down and we share from that perspective, people feel that truth in our vulnerability. And then you have the vision. This is inspiring others, right? This is about empowering them, activating them, letting them see this broader vision that you have and what is possible for them in whatever it is that you're offering. What am I here to build? How am I building it? And how can I show other people how to be a part of that? So these are your different stories. And even if you were to think about, like if I were to think about my rock bottom story, I could tell it in all 5 of these ways. It could be a way I build authority. Oh, it could be a way I build authority so you can see what I've overcome, the fires that I've walked through, what I've learned, how I've built a following, how I built a business, all of these different aspects. It can be the part where I talk about the vulnerability because I often share my mistakes in that journey, like the things that I've learned throughout that. It also is communicating my bigger vision. It's the big thing that I overcame that I'm helping others overcome. It builds connection because a lot of people will see themselves in my story, and it is my origin. And so you can tell all of your stories in these different formats for different reasons. So you don't like put it in a box. Like I'm never going to take one story and be like, this is just my authority story. I'll rework that same story 5 different ways to talk about it, to build connection, to articulate the vision that I'm creating and inviting people into my world. Of course, we're going to talk about authenticity again because that is the heart of everything that I do. But what you want to look for in this is, what is the emotion that you want your audience to feel as they hear your story? Are you sharing from a wound? Are you sharing from wisdom? This is super important. And I'll give you an example. Again, I'm teaching through my own story, right? When I first was feeling called to share my story, well, my guides were asking me to share my story. I don't think I ever felt the call to, but I answered the call of my guides to share my story. But in the beginning, I wanted people to know what I had been through. I wanted people to know, like there was parts of me that like really wanted them to know what this narcissist did. And there was parts of me that was really like felt revengeful at times. That's sharing from a wound. So I didn't share from that place. I had to wait until I had alchemized that. Now, you don't necessarily have to wait. You tell the parts of your story that you can alchemize and share. But to share like the bigger story, I had to alchemize that, or I would have been sharing from like revenge. I would have been sharing from this place of like, see me, see what I went through, versus I'm sharing this story to help you versus about me, right? Because your story isn't, it is your story, but your story is about other people. If you're telling your story from the place of wanting validation, wanting to be seen, wanting to be heard, those things are okay, but not when it comes to, let me just think about how I want to word that. It's okay to want those things. When you come from that place, you actually attract the exact opposite. So if you are needing validation, that is a dissonance in your energy field. The thing that you need, you often repel. So when you put a story out there needing validation, two things happen. You are going to get people who are also in like a victim mindset because in order, if we need validation, if we need to be seen or we need to be heard, we haven't alchemized that pain, whether we want to or not, we are still in a victim energy. And so if you are broadcasting from that energy, that's what you're attracting in is people who are probably in that victim mindset who maybe aren't ready to do the work that you're offering. So it's also counterproductive to whatever it is that you're trying to bring people into. The other part of that is you generally attract the exact opposite. So I've had clients who really needed validation, and when they would start telling their that's the story from that place, they would attract negativity. People who questioned them, people who were trying to call them out, people who were just like this negative interaction, which then became a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, see, this is why I don't tell my story. This is why I always say, like, you should really focus on doing that Break Free Be Seen course to alchemize as much as possible. Visibility blocks are always going to come up at every stage of the journey, but it helps clear out that initial stuff. So when you get here, you can share from a place of wisdom versus wounding, right? So again, when you're sharing from those vibrations, you are attracting that same vibration in, which means you're attracting the wrong people. They're not going to be the people who are ready to act, the people who are ready to buy. And then two, you're attracting the exact opposite and kind of creating this self-fulfilling prophecy that says, see, this is why I don't share. And then often people shut down there. Um, so again, wound over wisdom, wisdom over wound, right? Which one are you doing? Are you seeking validation or are you creating transformation? So when you tell your story, and I'll give you an example, when I tell the story about narcissism, I never talk about what the narcissist did to me. I always talk about my role in that situation and how I overcame it, but I never go into the victim energy of like, look at everything that happened to me. I always talk about it from this place of like, this is where I was, and this is how I had to crawl myself out of that because I had gotten myself into that situation, right? I never tell it from that other energy because that just doesn't exist to me. But it did in the beginning before I had really healed the wounding there. And then does it bring the focus back to the reader's own power? So you'll notice anytime I tell my story, I'm telling it from a place of here's how I did XYZ. And if you find yourself here, this is what you can do. And so it's always bringing it back to the reader to show them here's a light, right? I always consider myself a lighthouse, a frequency of lights, like just lighting the pathway for somebody else. And if I'm doing that in my social media content, then I can always feel good about what I'm sharing. This is where I'll also say, and I'll talk about this a little bit more in like the visibility blocks, but when you share from a frequency of love and kindness, you won't be canceled. You will not get attacked. You will not have people coming after you or people from the past coming after you. When you are sharing from that lower energy of making it about yourself, of wanting to call others out, or just that unhealed energy, that's when things can get like a little bit of a bumpy ride. So share from the frequency of love and kindness always. And that is like your safety because then you know you're always acting from the right place versus acting from the ego. Okay. And then you're going to workshop this. So I just want you to pick any story that you have in mind. Again, it could be the grocery store yesterday, it could be your origin story, whatever pops into your head. And you just want to make sure you have these 4 T's. Is it easy to come up with a hook? If it's really hard for you to come up with a hook, that first line or that first opening statement, then either you still have a block there, or maybe it's not the right story to tell right now. Maybe it still needs more workshopping, right? But if you've got the 4 T's and you've got a hook, you've got a story. And then you always want to make sure you're doing it to serve, right? To serve and inspire other people on this journey. So this is how you're going to find your story. This is just simply to say, okay, this is a story I can tell. I've got all the pieces. And now we're going to bring it into the story alchemy, which is where the magic happens. Some of the magic. So in the finding your story, you found your story, you've got the T formula, right? So you can always easily just articulate whether or not you've got the right story. And now we're going to transform this from just information into energy that you're sharing. This is where you move beyond just like the words and the facts and like all the pieces, and you create a feeling and you create possibility and you create a pathway. And most importantly, you create an invitation for people to come into your world. So kind of the basis for this is there's an emotion, a lesson, a frequency, and an action. So the emotion is what opens the tone, right? This is setting the whole tone for the whole story. And so what do you want people to feel when you're telling your story? Are they inspired? Do they see possibility? Do you want them to feel excited? Do you want them to feel entertained maybe? Like this is again, depending on what your archetypes are and your visibility codex, this is how you'll know what to plug in here. And then what is the lesson? What's the main thing you want someone to hear when they hear your story? And again, I always act from that place of leave people better than you found them. So can you give them one thing to go do? What are they going to leave this story with? Are they going to feel are they going to feel transformed? Are they going to feel inspired? Are they going to feel like, "Oh, thank God I can see myself in that story. Okay, if she did that, I need to go binge her content and figure out how she did that." Like, what is the thing that we're instilling here and what we've experienced? Then there's the frequency. Are you bringing this frequency of peace, power, liberation, love, relief, hope, like whatever it is? This is the frequency that you hold in your body that you are transmitting out through your stories. This is also why it's really important that you've healed those wounds because you cannot hold, like, if you're telling a story and you've still got a bunch of shame over here, you're not going to be able to hold the frequency of empowerment. You're not going to, like, people are going to feel whatever is in your field. So, again, you want to make sure break free and be seen is like the best place to start. And if you need to go back, like I often go back. If I go to tell a story and like I'm going to tell that and all of a sudden I feel this shame or I feel this hesitance, I go back to like the experience mapping and break free. And I go back through those pieces until I feel like that part of my story, I've alchemized those wounds so I can share it from the right place. So even if you've done the course, you may want to go back and repeat some of the areas. I do it all the time in order to alchemize whatever's coming up so that my story can be impactful in the way that I want it to be. And then the action. So this is where you're either saying, hey, go do XYZ today, or are you inviting them into maybe something that you're offering? Okay, this is your writing practice. So I want you to take your story and I want you to go through each of these prompts, the emotion, dig into that moment. What were you feeling in that moment? What could have been activated in you? What did you need to hear? What did you need a coach, a healer, anybody to say to you? What did you need to hear in that moment? What did you need to get yourself out of that space, right? We need people to understand in our story, through the story, what we were going through so that they feel that and then can see what you did next, right? So this is how we're structuring the story. We're bringing them into this emotion. So when you're thinking about that, really hold the frequency of who you were in that moment because you're almost always helping a prior version of yourself. And what did you need to hear? What would have activated you out of that? What would have triggered you? Like, really lean into that. This is a really important piece of what you're articulating. And I still do a lot of this work when I'm telling new stories or I'm bringing up new concepts. I really think about what people are going through. And then I go back through even my old journal entries to be like, what did that feel like for me? Right? Like, really getting back into the moment of what that was and like, what is just one thing I could instill in somebody today? Okay. And then the lesson, again, sharing. I always recommend sharing your wisdom versus your knowledge. Knowledge is good too, but it's something that we've learned. And so then we can get into this like pit of regurgitating information versus teaching from our own wisdom. So this is where you start thinking about like, how can I give this person hope? How can I show them a piece of my journey without it overwhelming them, right? Especially if it's like your origin story, without it overwhelming them, but how can I start to clear a path? And so I almost see this in my head like a board game. Like this person is here right now. Here we go. This person is here right now where I used to be. And this is where they want to get. This is where I am now. What does this path look like all the way through? And how can I maybe break that into like 3 things that they can take in this video? Because if you give people 10 to 15 things, they're going to be overwhelmed. And then they get like further stuck in where they're at. And they're not going to like come into your world, whether that be follow you, buy from you, download from you, whatever it is. Again, go through the frequency. So this is how you become magnetic is when you can hold the frequency. It's not about you, it's not about being seen, understood, or validated. It's about creating transformation. That's so important. Is the frequency that you are holding, the story that you are telling, are you creating transformation for someone else? That is what makes something magnetic and that is what will pull your people in. That's when your videos hit hundreds of thousands of views, it brings in thousands of followers, downloads, whatever. This part here is like the most important part. Um, and you will feel as you practice this, you will feel a resonance in your body and you will know, I've got the story. You're going to feel it. And in the beginning, I mean, I told my stories so many times before I felt like I had that resonance because I had to practice, I had to play with it. And then you get to this point where you share it and the resonance is in your body and you just know, like, I know this video is so impactful. I know it's so impactful. There was times where I like knew my story was impactful, but when I would go to tell it, I'd be like, I don't feel like this sums it up. I don't know how to tell this part of my story. I don't know how to talk about this. So I had to just like practice. And then I would start to feel this resonance in my body where I was like, oh, this is the thing. And then action. So again, you're inviting them into some form of movement. People need to be told actions. Like you can be like, work with me, but if you're not like, go to my bio and download this thing or comment this thing and I'll send you that, like you have to give them specific things to do. Or they just, for whatever reason, they just don't do it. So always ending this with an action where you're inviting them further into your world. And for me personally, you don't have to do this. Everybody needs to find their own beat. But for me personally, I like to give people an action where they can self-navigate the journey. And then I like to give an action that invites them into my world. So if you want to go do this by yourself, here's XYZ. Here's 3 steps you can take today, right? If you want to come into my world, here's where I'm going to guide you through this step by step. And I'm going to hold your hand, I'm going to walk you through it. Um, or you can download this or whatever. But I always give them like a self navigation and then something in my world. That's my preference. You don't have to do that. You can just bring them into your world. If you don't have anything to offer, you can just send them with an action they can self navigate. Totally up to you. Remember, it's a playground, so play around and see what feels good. And then again, alchemy. Everything is alchemy. And if you, in the Break Free Be Seen course, where it's taking your pain into your purpose and your mess into your message, then this part will be a little bit easier. But are you telling this story from a place of empowerment or are you still in pain about your story? Is this story seeking validation? Or are you offering transformation? Does it bring the focus back to your audience? Does your energy feel grounded, loving, and true? And you're gonna, I know we talked about this in the other worksheet, but you're gonna wanna ask yourself this throughout the process because it is very easy to slip into a place when there are still wounds that we don't see where we are seeking validation or we're telling the story. Like I have seen, oh, man, as a publicist, I saw so many people telling their story and like the story was so good. And if they could have just changed the frequency behind it, they were like just seeking the validation. And so it would always get repelled. But if they could have just shifted the frequency a little bit, they could have shared it from the right perspective and it would have had a massive impact. And you're telling your story to have impact, right? Because you don't need other people to see you. You need you to see you. You need you to see you to validate you and to understand you. You don't need that from the outside world. You only want it from the outside world when you haven't yet done it for yourself. So ask yourself these questions like repeatedly throughout the process. I always do, even like, even, well, it's been a couple days since I recorded any content, but even like 3 days ago, I was making content. And the first thing I was doing as I sat down, I was like, wait, why am I sharing this story? Okay, yeah, it is going to create transformation. Like this isn't about me anymore. Like I could, oh, but I'm always doing that check-in with myself because it's very easy to have strong emotions or to think that you've been through things and then all of a sudden like a new layer of healing comes up and now you're like, oh man, I thought I was past that, but I guess I'm back in the wounding of it. And so that's when you want to be able to shift in and out of different stories. That's why there's those 5 different types, right? Okay. So, an example, I used to think visibility meant being judged. I would shrink myself just to feel safe, as if that would save me from the judgment. But the truth is, hiding hurt more than being seen ever could. And the judgment, well, that's a call that was coming from inside the house. So, my own judgment was far worse than anything I could have had outside myself. I judged myself for everything I said and did, and I judged myself for the things I wasn't doing because of my fear. The day I realized judgment exists regardless and that my own judgment was the real culprit was the day I gave myself permission to just be messy. And I'll let you read through that. I'm not going to read through the whole thing, but you can see how I'm taking you through a moment where I'm like in this cage of being terrified to be seen because I'm being judged. But then there's that moment of realization of like, oh shit, it's just it's me. I'm the villain in the story, right? And so then I bring you through this story of how you can liberate yourself through this because this is what everybody goes through is like, I'm afraid I'll be judged or mocked or whatever. And the only time we're afraid of that is when we haven't accepted it ourselves. Once we accept it ourselves, we no longer care what the outside is thinking about it. Anyway, so that's an example. I'll let you read through that. And then we have the breakdown. The emotion, the lesson, the frequency, the action. So the emotion here was the fear of being seen. I was stuck in my own judgment. The lesson is that safety is found in authenticity and not hiding, and no one was holding me back but me. The frequency was empowerment, freedom, liberation. Sorry, this little comma is going to annoy me. The action, invitation to be seen and break free from their own mental prison. So I build up, hey, here's the mental prison I created for myself that I didn't even realize, and I thought it was outside of me. I realized it was me. I allowed myself to free myself from that. Here's what that looked like. And here's how you can recognize what the cage is for you. And here's how you get out of it. Okay, so how did it feel to tell your story this way? What emotion does it leave with you? How do you feel in your body when you read it out loud? And does your story now carry light, truth, and leadership? You guys are all leaders here. You are meant to be bringing people through the fire that you've walked through. You are meant to be bringing people through some type of a transformation. Are you leading from that leadership? Do you feel that your light and your truth? Does it feel good in your body? And in the beginning, it's going to feel uncomfortable because you're doing something new, because it's a new level and layer of vulnerability. And so that's why I'm saying, like, you're going to have that resonance in your body when you're just like, I know it's there. This is it. We got it. We did it. But it's going to take repetition. It took me months of telling my story to figure out how it felt good for me, what parts of it still needed to be alchemized, what parts of it was like resonating with people. So sometimes it's putting it out there and letting there be a feedback loop. And sometimes that feedback loop is uncomfortable because it's like non-existent. Like there are times I put out my story and I'd have like a video that had like 50,000 views on it, and then I'd put out my story and it would have like 1,000 views and like no comments or likes, and I could have easily spiraled with that, but I use that as data to say like, okay, let me look at the frequency behind this. Oh, there's still some wounding here. Okay, I was talking about this here. Maybe that's a part of the story that's not really helpful for people. And again, when you clear the wounding, you're telling it from a place of transformation. So you're not worried, like you can trim the fat out of the story and just focus on the parts that are actually meaningful. If you're writing a book, that's a different story. You have all the room in the world to tell your entire story. But when we're doing this through content, you only have a little bit of time. So you want to really just focus on what's actually important. So this is where you take your wisdom, your lived experience, and you turn it into an energetic transmission. This is when people will say, like, I heard your story, I saw your content, I resonated with you right away, and I immediately dove into your world and I bought from you. I immediately started binging your content. I've had people, multiple people say, I came across your content and I just booked a session because I just knew I needed to talk to you. I don't know why. I just wanted to talk to you. Like they paid for a call just to talk to me without a reason because the emotional resonance was so strong. And obviously there's like, they're ready to be seen. That's why they're coming in. Like my energetic codes are transformation. And so that's what their soul is asking for. But when I allow that transformation and leadership to show, it activates the soul part of them that's ready to transform and they come right into your world. And there's this instant, like, I knew right away I needed to work with you. That's what you want in your content, to call in the right people and also to repel the wrong people. So take your time in this section and go through and use this for like all the stories you can think of. If you've got the 4 T's, you've got the hook, go through it with this and keep telling it and then go and practice. Whether you're filming and posting or just filming right now, practice telling it over and over and over and over again. It's going to be so helpful for you because then it starts to become natural. So now for the most part for me, unless I'm talking about something new, or I'm talking about like a more recent experience, my story naturally just flows in and out of my content. And I generally know which part to focus on because I practiced it so much and because I allowed there to be a real time live feedback loop that showed me when I was on the right track and when I was off the right track. So dive in, play around, alchemize what needs to get alchemized. The alchemy itself is what becomes magnetic. So don't rush that process. Okay. But I can't wait to hear all of your stories and see what types of transformations that you guys are creating. Because remember, you tell your story, whatever views that you get out there, whatever people come into your world, just by telling the story, you have already begun the transformation process. That already takes a load off of you that you're carrying about what you have to do for the person that comes into your world. Because I often hear from people, I'm afraid my gifts won't show up. I'm afraid they're not good enough. I won't know what to do when they get on the call, whatever. Your story is already doing the work for you. Your frequency does the work for you. Like this is what I'm always teaching because when you get into that authenticity, it truly is. Your gifts are the icing on the cake. Your story starts to move energy in people the second that they hear it. So think about the transformation, the journey of transformation. They come across you for the first time on social media. They start hearing your story. multiple times. This is also why I encourage, um, what is the word? Just went in and out. Meaningful contribution in the community, because it's not just about liking each other's posts, which is also beautiful, but when we're sharing stories, we're literally clearing energy for each other. That's why it's so powerful. So when we're doing this in the community, we're doing it on the coaching calls, you're doing it in your social media, you're doing it in your life. Think about how much energy can be moved in the most simple way and how much healing and the ripple effect that that can have. So that is why your story is so important. So anyways, have so much fun with this part with the alchemy. Go back into the break free and be seen wherever you need to fully alchemize that. And then just start practicing and allow yourself to be witnessed in the process. That really is where the magic happens. And at some point, you have to come out of hiding and start sharing the story anyway. So I always recommend people kick it off with that, but you do what feels comfortable for you. It is certainly your journey. And I'll see you in the next module.